know you keep this open because you keep looking at it. You're looking for something.
I was looking at that article right now.
Ah,
She's getting ready for a quick escape.
I'm wondering. It just was like she's waiting for somebody or something. Got all the filters on that thing, right? Got my Snapchat filter settings on there. Give me the big doe eyes and all that sort of stuff. So I heard about this new condition that people are showing up with, this Snapchat dysmorphia. Have you heard this? Right? So people are showing up at plastic surgeons now with their Snapchat filters on their face that they use when they take selfies, and they're telling plastic surgeons that I want to look like this, and I don't mean like, the Bow Wow face or the rabbit ears or whatever. And plastic surgeons have absolutely determined that this is a American Medical Association registered condition. So that's not what I wanted you to get out of today, but I just thought of that. So yes, this is me. I'm excited to be here. I brought the rain and the thunder. So we have a lot of hospitality folks in here. The folks who are in hospitality, what's your bag?
What's my bag?
Yes. Sports and leisure. Was there another one?
It was me.
Yeah.
It's integrative studies, but I'm a minor in hospitality.
Fantastic. Well, good. Good. So, I was thinking of asking you guys a question, but I thought I'd give you my answer instead. So, why hospitality? Why hospitality? I bet if I asked each of you individually, I'd get various answers, but I think there'd be a common theme, and it may be something along the lines of, I like people. Does that have anything to do with it, right? I like people. Do you really? Do you really? Okay. Yeah. That's not why I got into it. It evolved into that. So I was in high school, and I was a ball player. I played baseball. I grew up in New York. I grew up in Brooklyn, and I was a baseball player. And that's what I was going to do. I had signed my letter of intent in February, and I was going to go to a school in Ohio and play baseball. That's what I was going to do. And then we don't play baseball year round in New York like you do here. And I was pitching in April, and it was cold, and I didn't do enough warm-ups, and I heard something pop in my elbow, and I tore a tendon in my elbow. And in 1977, today they'd fix that. They do Tommy John surgery. I'd be out for a year, but in 77 they weren't doing that. Tommy John was borderline elective, and they certainly weren't doing it on 17-year-old kids. And so all of a sudden, I get a letter from the university that says, hey, you're a nice guy. We'd love for you to still come here, but we're not going to pay for it anymore. And so I didn't know what I was going to do. And it wasn't like I was getting a lot of pressure from my folks to say, hey, you got to come up with something. But I felt like I needed to have some sort of direction as I was now going to pick out another school, because I really didn't want to go all the way to Ohio, right? Columbus just wasn't it for me. So I decided I would go back to this. How many people in 8th grade, you take this exam, and it's some sort of an aptitude test, and it kind of lets you know maybe where you might have some skill sets, or might be a good idea if you pursued this line of work. Well, I took an exam like that, and hotel manager came up on it as one of the things. And so I said, I like hotels, right? I've always had a good time when I went to a hotel. And I don't think there's a lot of math or science involved in running a hotel. So how difficult can the major be? You know, because I was a solid 2.7 student. So, you know, I wasn't lighting the academic world on fire. And so I said, well, let me find a school that offers a hospitality or a hotel management program. And again, in the late 70s, there weren't a ton like there are today. There's a lot of options for you today. But in the 70s, there was maybe 45 or 50. And of course, there were the ones we all think about today still. This school wasn't here. But there was the Cornells and the Arizona States and the UNLVs, the Johnson and Wales, and you know, quite honestly, I didn't have I did well on my SATs. We didn't take ACTs back then. You had to have SAT scores, and I did well, but I just didn't have the grade point average, and I didn't. All my extracurriculars were sports, so I ended up at a place called Niagara University in Niagara Falls, New York. And they had a hospitality program, and so I get to Niagara, and I am just absolutely, you know, the classes were great, you know, intro to hospitality, front desk management, you know. We didn't have any of these things. There were no computers. The industry itself wasn't computerized. And so, have a seat, come on in, relax. So I had an instructor who was very much, he was the general manager of the Niagara Falls Hilton. And I remember his name, Terry Kane. And Terry said, Frank, you seem interested, you're engaged in class, whatever that meant. You know, it was a midday class, so quite honestly, I wasn't showing up baked all the time. And so I would ask a question. I kind of sat near the front. So he asked me, he said, have you ever worked in a hotel? I said, no. And he said, so how do you know that this business is for you? And I told him my little story, and he was like, well, you know, what you need to do is this summer when you go back home, you need to work in a hotel. And you'll know real quick whether or not you like this business. Just like you'll know if you like eating Brussels sprouts or anything. You'll know in a heartbeat. And so that summer, I left, and I went back home. I went back into the city, and I got a job working at a front desk of this hotel in New York called the Mayflower Hotel, right on Central Park West. Right across from the park, and it was a boutique hotel, had a couple hundred rooms. It was one of those old school Peabody-like places, and it just seemed that summer that like everybody who stayed there was a celebrity. Robert De Niro was living there, Martin Scorsese was living there, a lot of athletes were living there. This may be before your time, but there was a boxer, Roberto Duran, who was pretty important at the time. He lived there. So that Amy Irving was living there while she was doing Amadeus on Broadway. So, you know, it was, and these people were coming up, and they knew my name, and they were asking me for help. Can I give them directions? Can I make change? It wasn't unusual for any of them to go, hey, Frank, can you break a 20 for me? And I was like, I have arrived. This is the shit. This is what I want to do. You know, and if you've ever worked at a front desk, has anybody here ever worked at a front desk of a hotel? Right. Right. So the desk is kind of like a stage, right? You've got the desk in front of you. There's the recessed lighting that's shining down on you. And you're there. You've got your uniform. You're like the nerve center of this place. And everybody wants to get to know you because you can make things happen. You've got the juice. And I was like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do. I had no idea how much money I was making. My parents called me up, and they're like, hey, what are you making? I was like, I don't know. I just got the job. Just got the job. And I'm loving it. And so So I went back that year to school. Then the following summer, I got another job at another hotel in Manhattan, doing reservations work. And another summer, I did something else. I was a bellman. That was a great job. I made a ton of money. Bellman in New York, in a big city, they make bank. So just hailing cabs, taking luggage, and here's the secret, right? The bellman, all we did, the doorman, all we did was we took the luggage from the car and handed it to the bellman, and they tipped us. Wasn't unusual for me to go home, after an 8-hour shift with like $300 or $400 in my pocket. And I was like 19, 20. This is so great. So, but my goal, right? Because I was like, I want to be the general manager of one of those big hotels, like a Waldorf Astoria, the Plaza, the Pierre, because those were the only options available then, right? We're talking 79, 80. There were no Hampton Inns, there were no Hilton Garden Inns, there were none of these limited feature focused service hotels. It was those, and then there were roadside Holiday Inns, your mom and pop motels, seaside resorts, that sort of thing. And I was one of those jaded New Yorkers, so this cat was not going to live west of the Hudson River. So this slide. So I did this. I've been doing this for a long time, so this is why you guys are listening to me. So 35 years. It says 33. It's old. I've been managed people for 25 years. It took me about 8 years of just doing individual jobs before I would say I was really managing people. I was a supervisor and stuff, but I wouldn't say I was an effective manager till after about 8 years. Because here's what happens, and maybe who's managing people today, right? So here's what goes on, and this is one of the things that's not only, I think, wrong with our industry, but with the service industry as a whole. So you become super proficient in one particular discipline, or maybe a couple of them. So you may become, like I was a really great front desk clerk, right? I was good at it. I could handle 2 or 3 lines on the phone, check somebody in, check somebody out. I was really good at it. Next thing I knew, they're like, hey, you're going to be the front office supervisor, which basically meant that I was making schedules, doing payroll, and handling some guest issues, and dealing with my coworkers who were my friends, right? These were my friends, right? We went out together and drank, but now I'm their supervisor. I didn't receive any management training on how to manage people. I was just kind of thrust into the role, and I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to take the hat off of friend and coworker and now be supervisor. And hopefully each of you who raised your hand, they gave you some supervisor training, management training, and said, now that you're going to be a manager, you need to learn about yourself, what your management style, but more often than not, that doesn't happen. We put people in management roles, and we just say, hey, go do this. And people fail, or they struggle, they flounder, and they find out that it's way more difficult than they thought, and the increase in pay is not worth the aggravation. It happens a lot in sales. You see people elevated from, they were a strong producer in sales, and the next thing you know, they're a sales manager. And all of a sudden, they spend more time dealing with people's human resources issues and the drama and all of that stuff, and their production goes down. And so they don't make it as a sales manager. They go back to producing. And then I spent my last 20 years working for Hilton, which I Promise Hotels brought me to Memphis, and I'll talk about that. But Hilton bought Promise, and 16 of those years I kind of focused on a category called extended stay, building and managing support organizations for Hilton. So in 84, I get done with school, guys, and school was stressful. Just a lot of stress. Right? You got stress. So, and during this talk, you're never going to hear me say when you get into the real world, right? Because you're in the real world now. Yeah. So any instructors or anybody who comes into your class and says, well, in the real world, raise your hand and go, well, can you explain to me what world I'm in today? Can you tell me the artificial nature of the world that I'm working with today? Help me understand that. Because there's nothing more real than the world you're living in today. You've got responsibilities, whether it's you've got rent, you've got tests, you've got a relationship, you've got this stuff. I mean, that's real, right? So it's just different circumstances as time goes on. That's it. So you're in the real world. So in 84, I'm done with my academic career. And so I had to take a little time off. I had to take some time off. I had to blow up some steam. The stress of tests. Wasn't like I had to catch up on any sleep. I hear this all the time. I'm just so worried that my son or daughter isn't going to get enough sleep at college. I got more sleep when I was in school. Anybody here feel sleep deprived yet? You're working though, right? You have a job. Yeah. So get your sleep now. Your sleep deprivation will come as your life proceeds. So I decided to take this time off, like about 2.5, 3 months. And I just went to the beach every day and hung out with my friends. We had our same routine, kicking around the neighborhood in Brooklyn. But then I get a call, because my folks had moved out to Chicago. I get a call and they say, hey, jackass, when are you going to do something? And I was living rent-free in my grandmother's apartment because she was living in Florida with her new husband. Yes, that's right, my grandmother had a new husband. And the woman had needs. What am I going to tell you? I don't know. So here's the way we did things back then, right? There wasn't any online job sourcing, right? So I printed a couple, 300 maybe copies of my resume and 4 or 5 different versions of a cover letter, and did a direct mailing to just about every GM in Manhattan of every hotel that I wanted to work to, and stuck them all in the mail. And then I sat back and waited. And I'll be damned if I didn't get a phone call from one of those general managers from the Helmsley Hotel organization, which back then, Leona Helmsley was the queen of New York hotels. So she had like 6 or 7 hotels in Manhattan, and so they made me a sales manager for her New York properties, selling corporate rates. I had no sales training, and I didn't get any. They just pointed, but I had this great office. I was on Central Park South. I had this great office looking at the park. I shared it with this Asian gentleman, Mickey Chong, who became my mentor. And he was in group sales, and he'd been selling for 25, 30 years. He taught me everything I needed to know in a very informal way. But they gave me a rate to sell. They gave me a corporate rate of $91. If you can find a $91 rate in Manhattan today, take it. So they said, here's a form, and with that $91 rate, now go into that building, the GM building, which today, if anybody's been to New York, there's that Apple store that everybody has seen, the glass Apple store. Well, the tall building behind it used to be the GM building. And so they said, just go to the top floor, knock on every door, and work your way down. And just ask them a few questions like, do you guys ever bring people in town who use hotels in the area? And that's what I did. That's what I did every day for 3 weeks. And then they said, okay. And I signed up a few people. And then they said, okay, go to this building. And I did that. So after a week or so, I began to develop a spiel. Like I had a little shtick. And it was really cool because I got to go into some great offices, right? I got to see some, the NFL has an office there. Philip Morris, the company that makes all the cigarettes, right? And this was in the 80s, right? And so everybody in there was just smoking, right? You sit in the waiting room, right? And in the waiting room on the tables is just these things just filled with cigarettes. And as you're waiting there, they're like, would you like to have a cigarette? Sure. I'm smoking, That's just the way it was. Liquor distributors, clothing distributors, I was in the garment district, and it was just terrific. And I did that for a couple of years, and then I said, I'd like to learn more about how a hotel runs, the operations. And so I moved into an operations role. I became the night manager of the St. Moritz Hotel. So I was on duty from 11 p.m. till 7 in the morning. So the graveyard shift. But I wasn't alone at the hotel. We had people who, more finance type folks, who were closing out the 2 restaurants we had. And I was in charge of the desk, closing out that side of things. And, a lot of things happen between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. in that part of town. Just a lot of stuff. And, I was thrown in the middle of it, and, from high-priced escorts to just some crazy obnoxious behavior from people who, I had a phone book thrown at me by the guy who ran the Ringling Brothers Circus. I used to get yelled at by Good Morning America. We had the contract to house all their guests when they would come in. So you see somebody on Good Morning America in the morning, whether it's a celebrity or somebody who happened to be topical and Good Morning America wanted to talk to them, they stayed at our hotel. And sometimes you'd get some rubes who'd never been to New York, right? And they would do some crazy, stupid stuff, and it would typically happen between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. And there were plenty of times where we had to wake them up at 5 a.m. because that show starts at, they had to be at the studio at 6. David Carradine, so Kung Fu, that show is probably a little bit before your time, but he lived there and was super obnoxious. Richard Chamberlain. So I got a real education in how a hotel works, and I took that and then moved on to the Marriott Marquis. Now everybody's probably seen the Marriott Marquis if you watch New Year's Eve, New Year's Rockin' Eve, or any of the New Year's Eve shows. It's that big gray hotel that's in Times Square. And it was a super exciting time for New York. Times Square was changing. So if you watched that HBO show called The Deuce, right? So that's what Times Square used to be like. It was like Sodom and Gomorrah. And it was just not a place you wanted to be after dark. But when hotels like the Marriott Marquis opened up, the Novotel, the Holiday Inn, it started to change. Today, it's like a tourist wonderland. No cars drive through it and everything. But, in 85 and 86, it was still in flux. And so our first New Year's Eve there, we literally told our guests, look, if you're not outside the hotel but at 9 o'clock, by 9 o'clock at night, you're stuck in here till 2:30 in the morning, because we're not unlocking the doors between 9 p.m. and 2:30 in the morning. because we just don't know what's going to happen. And that's just the way it was. Today it's a little different, but I was the night manager and manager on duty there. So I was in charge of that hotel, 2,100 rooms, between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. And I was 24 years old, and and it was awesome. It was awesome. They custom fit me for tuxedos, because at night, you know, on Fridays and Saturdays, they wanted me to walk around in a tuxedo, and we had a housekeeping staff that ran 24 hours. So housekeeping, I had 75 people in the housekeeping department. 24-hour room service. We had 40 people on security. Anybody been to the Marquis, the Marriott Marquis in New York? Right? So it's like this gigantic, the front desk is on the 8th floor. There's these big circular exposed elevators. Now those elevators, when we first opened up, you know, they were the type of elevators that the door wouldn't open unless the cab lined up exactly with the floor. I probably gave away in the neighborhood of about $50,000 worth of food and liquor because those doors wouldn't open up and people would be stuck inside there. And let me tell you, when you're hanging there, because it's an exposed elevator, people freak out. They go nuts, even though we're there and we're telling them, hey, everything's gonna be okay. We finally moved, they were General Electric elevators. We finally moved the people from GE, the service people. We gave them a permanent room at the hotel for the first year, just so that they could be on call and fix this stuff. There were lots of little things like that. That's where I learned the term, when you have a problem, if you can throw money at it to fix it, do it. And this was Marriott's flagship. And after 2 years, they started to transfer people out of that hotel because it had been, you know, it had been a busy 2 years, and people were starting to experience, I don't want to say burnout, but you were losing your enthusiasm for the work. And so I got transferred to Chicago, and they put me in a hotel, the Marriott, in Schaumburg, Illinois, which was 400 rooms. And I felt like I was working in a morgue. It just was slow, slow, slow. And so I was the front office manager there, and I just couldn't get people to move quick enough. And whether it was the fact that the pace of living was just a little bit slower there, or whatever, I had to get out. And we worked at the Hyatt in downtown Chicago, which was a little bit more my speed. Another 2,300 room hotel, downtown, big convention hotel. And again, I was front office manager there, moved into a manager on duty role. But I wanted to get back into sales, because that's where now I knew how a hotel worked. I thought I could sell a hotel effectively, instead of doing some of the things I saw the salespeople doing, making promises that the hotel staff couldn't live up to. Like, sure, you can have an early check-in, but we were full the night before. Sure, we can accommodate, you know, this many bags per room, or we can have these things. I thought I would be a more effective salesperson. So I couldn't get into Hyatt's sales program. So I left and I went to an independent called the Lenox House Suites, which is right on Rush Street in Chicago, and a lot of action downtown. And I was their director of sales and marketing for 4 years. And that was one of the earliest hotels that was embracing this type of guest called an extended stay guest. And this was around 89, 90. And one day I was on a business trip visiting one of our feeder market clients, and I get a call from a guy who's building a hotel back out in the suburbs in Schaumburg. And he's telling me about this hotel, and it's doing all the things that the hotel I was working at couldn't do. It was meeting all the objections that the guests I was trying to sell to couldn't get. And it was this thing called a Homewood Suites Hotel. And lo and behold, this was the 5th Homewood Suites Hotel that was being opened. And So he offered me the job as the director of sales there, and I took it. Now, I was also a newlywed, and we lived out in the suburbs. And so, you know, sometimes things line up for you. Sometimes. They don't always. But this time it did. And there was a lot of visibility with this job, especially with the parent company, Promise Hotels, which was based here in Memphis. And so we got a memorandum after I'd been there a few years, and it talked about a job that was open in Memphis, Tennessee, for another one of the brands, the Hampton Inn brand, which was new-ish. And they were looking for a field director, a director of field sales and marketing. And so I happened to know the guy who sent that memo out here in Memphis, and he said, hey, what's the skinny on this job? And so he said, hey, can you come to Memphis tomorrow? And that was a Thursday, and we ended up shaking hands over the phone that Sunday. And so in March of '94, we moved to Memphis. And I was the director of field sales and marketing for Hampton Inn. So at the time, there was about 350, 400 Hampton Inns. So, but we were opening a new Hampton every 3 days. So today, there's over 2,200 Hampton Inns. During the 6 years I was doing that job, I probably opened up about 400 Hampton Inns. And I visited every little shit town up and down the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. If there was an exit on the interstate that had a Walmart, a university or a college, and I mean a community college, and it had a Cracker Barrel maybe. This was a good spot to put a Hampton. And so field sales and marketing meant we got to get this hotel set up to succeed. So sometimes all that meant for a Hampton was telling the owner, do you have a billboard going north and one going south? Sometimes that's all he needed. Sometimes it was a little bit more involved. We also had to make sure that they were following all our rules of operation. So I got to meet a lot of hotel owners who were opening up their first Hampton. Many of those guys today own 15, 20 Hamptons, Homewoods, Hilton Garden Inns. I got to watch their organizations grow as time wore on as well. So we started to open up other brands as well. In 2007, Hilton bought us. Hilton bought Promise. Promise was the parent company for Hampton, Homewood, and Embassy Suites. We had previously merged with DoubleTree out of Arizona. So we were then those 4 brands, 5 brands if you count Hampton Inn & Suites. Hilton bought us. We were a publicly traded company, which meant you could buy our stock, Promise, which meant to serve in Latin, P-R-O-M-U-S. So Hilton buys us and decides they want to take us private. So for all of us who had been working there for a while, we owned stock, right? You know, you get paid in stock, you get bonuses in stock. So now Hilton says, we're going to take the company private, and if you own stock, we're going to buy it at this agreed upon price. So if you were a long-term employee, if you had been working there like 10 years or so, you made some bank. So you got these amazing checks. There were a lot of people who retired right after that in 2007 and 2008 because they had never sold their stock over time, right? And then there was a lot of folks who reinvested, did whatever. And it was about that time that we opened up Hampton Inn & Suites. And since I had worked at Homewood, and a Hampton Inn & Suites was kind of like a combination of a Homewood and a Hampton Inn, I set up the support organization for Hampton Inn & Suites. And I did that for a few years and then landed back with Homewood Suites and built their support organization. And then we added other extended stay brands. We added Home2 and watched that support organization. That was the best job I ever had. I got to build a team that I called the League of America. I got to hire folks who individually had superpowers, and each of them had a different superpower. And as I was adding people, I was like, I need this superpower. I need somebody who's expert in revenue management. I need somebody who's strong in local sales. And that was when I really started to learn about collaborating and leveraging and really starting to come into my own as it relates to managing people. And so one of the things as you guys grow, and for those of you who are managing people, understanding what people do well and not focusing on, because so many times when you get a review, how many people have been through like a performance appraisal or a review at work, right? Hopefully, they don't spend too much time on what you don't do well, but most performance appraisals are set up to point out the things we don't do well, right? And what you need. There's an opportunity for you. I'm going to challenge you to, and there are some things that you're just never going to be good at or proficient at. Like, I hated doing my expense reports. It was just something that didn't strengthen me, right? I just didn't, I didn't like doing it. And it wasn't until I said, can we have an assistant for our department, that I was able to delegate that work. And that was something I was able to do. But I was never going to be good at that. And I was able to work for people who recognized what my strengths were, which then I was able to look at what other people's strengths were and manage them according to their strengths, not what their weaknesses were, right? Some things you're just not good at, and that's okay. Look, I am not handy, right? I can't fix shit in the house. I just can't. Not only can't I fix stuff in the house, I don't trust my own work, right? So if I'm hanging something heavy on the wall, I don't really trust that it's going to stay there. So when we've got that sort of thing to do, my wife, who grew up with like crazy handy guys in her family, like her dad and her brothers, super handy. They're, with engines and building, they weld, they do all this stuff. My tool, what my toolkit consisted of when I came to the marriage? I had like a butter knife. That was it. That's what I used to, and a hammer. That was it. I didn't fix shit. I wrote checks. I don't. And so her dad would come over to fix something, right? He would come over and visit us, right? My wife would have a to-do list for, here's a daddy do list, right? And so he would say, come on, Frankie, I'm going to show you how to do this stuff. And I would be like, I'd be like that little kid. I'd be like Dennis the Menace. I'd be like, this is great. It's just not my thing. And so finally he figured out, this isn't what, it doesn't strengthen me. It doesn't, so I'm not going to be good at that stuff. Yeah, I could persevere. I could maybe take a class. I could go to those Home Depot Saturday classes and learn how to tile. So I'm never going to be good at that. I didn't grow up that way. My dad didn't fix stuff. His dad didn't fix stuff. And we grew up in apartments, in tenement houses. We weren't fixing shit. We didn't have cars. There wasn't things being worked on. I didn't have motorcycles and that sort of stuff. So if you work with people's strengths rather than their weaknesses when you're leading people, that's how you'll get the most out of them. And we were able to support Homewood Suites to the point where we won 7 J.D. Power Awards in a row for customer satisfaction. And so my team was responsible for working with the managers at the property, the owners at the hotel, making sure they had everything they needed to be successful. Sometimes it was just navigating the waters at Hilton because it's a labyrinth, right? Anybody work at a Hilton hotel? Right? So there's that website, The Lobby, right? You could just absolutely get lost in there. So it was like our job to help make it so that if you spent more than 2 or 3 minutes looking for something, you spent too much time, call us. And then after 20 years, there was more things I wanted to do, but you just get to a certain point when you're like, you know what, I'm not going to become the CEO of this company, and the next job isn't really going to get me to be able to do the things I want to do. So it was time. And I always knew I wanted to do this. I always wanted to do this to let folks like know what's really going on out there. And what's really going on out there is that whether you're hotel focused, where's the people who are thinking maybe they like the idea of working in a hotel? There's a few. Whether you're interested in a restaurant, I love my food and beverage people. I grew up in the restaurant business. My grandfather owned restaurants in New York. Never wanted to work in one. I was the worst busboy, water and butter guy ever. And he was so old school. I'd be sitting in the back and he'd go, Frankie, if you got time to lean, I've got time to clean. And there's that funky smell. I don't know what it is. Anybody been in the back of a restaurant? Right? The back of the house? I don't get it. Right? They're making such beautiful food. I mean, the food is so beautiful. And but the kitchen where they're cooking it just doesn't match the food. It's just, I don't know whether it's the cleaning supplies, all the people, whatever. And I get like this flashback, not the good kind. And so I just knew I didn't want to be a part of that world. F&B just wasn't where I wanted to be. But I love my food and beverage people because I can appreciate, a restaurant that becomes a well-oiled machine when you've got somebody really strong running the front and you got somebody who knows how to get the most of the people in the back and is so efficient that the restaurant is profitable and you know what to do to get to your customers and you do it night after night after night and it gets better each time. There's something to be said about consistency, but when you can get better, especially in a restaurant. That's what it's all about. So I'm here to tell you that the opportunities in those fields, event planning, they're tremendous. It's not like I'm talking to you about finance or engineering or any of those businesses that go like this, or consulting, business consultants and banking, right, that really hinge on the economy. Our industry is always going to need good people looking to do a good job. There's nobility in what we do, right? So it doesn't matter what part of our industry you're working in, right? As long as you can find the nobility in the work, and that means if serving people isn't a chore, right, then you're gonna be fine. But if you cop an attitude one day and like, serve these people, right? How many people here wake up every day feeling like, I wanna serve, I wanna do, I am all about it? How many people wake up every day feeling like that? Thank goodness you're all honest. You don't, right? We don't wake up that way every day. There are some days, right, where I just feel like, yeah, I'm all about it. But not every day, right? So the true professionals, which is what you guys are going to be if you're not already, right? Professionals know what to do on those days. It's not the days when you feel great. It's easy when everything's going good and everything's great. It's easy to do your job when everything in your life is lined up, when the planets have lined up, when your horoscope says you are a superstar and everything is going to go your way, right? It's easy, but it's those other days, right? So do you know how to get into character? And whatever it takes to get into character. Maybe you got to drive the long way to work. Maybe you got to listen to your song 3 or 4 times in a row to get you there. Because especially as a leader, and some of you may have heard this in another class that I taught, but as a leader, they are watching you. They are watching everything you do. And so if you walk in there with your head down, get me into my office, let me shut the door, I don't want to deal with anything, you are giving tacit approval to everybody else to do the same thing. When I tell you they are watching everything you do, they are. How many people have worked in a place where when you got to work and worked for somebody, where when you got to work, you went to another coworker and you said, hey, anybody ever been in that situation? Yeah, right? That sucks. Or you said, you know, my boss, I swear he's bipolar. Or did he take his meds today? You know. So sometimes we can learn from people who don't do things right, who are in a position of responsibility today, and we could say that's not what I want to be like when I'm a leader. And you don't have to wait till you're a leader to do that. You can be an example for people today when you're not leading, when you're serving, when you're checking people in, when you're checking people out, when you're checking the tables for an event that you've set up. It's just that simple. You know, we talk about, I've got to deal with people. I've got to tolerate this situation. If you think about those two words, deal and tolerate, aren't we setting a super low bar for being around other people? Isn't that a really low bar, right? I've got to just deal with Chris, or I'm going to tolerate Chris. Isn't that really low, right? Wouldn't I rather collaborate, or wouldn't I rather, you know, be a part of, or how can I help Chris, or how can I bring something to that situation? So think about it when you say, oh man, I got to deal with this, I got to deal with that, or I'm going to tolerate this. That's the bare minimum. That it should be like, this is as low as I can go, is dealing and tolerating. But that's what it's come to, right? We don't, we have, basically guys, if you're okay bringing excellence to mediocrity, right? There's plenty of things you can do out there where that's going to be fine. And you'll stay in the middle, you might get some security out of your life, but if you want to get the most out of your experience here, and whatever your experience, whatever your plans are for your experience, you don't have to know now. If you don't, that's perfectly fine, right? There may be people in your life who are going, what's it going to be? What's it going to be? What are you going to do? What's happening? And that pressure is like, you may not get the job, right? You may not. It may take you 8 years, 5 years, 10 years, But just make sure that at the end of the day, when you look in the mirror and you're wiping your face, you're brushing your teeth, that you can say, did I really do the best I could today? And if you can say that, then you should be able to sleep okay, right? And that's all you want out of things. Because I want to be more than reasonably happy. I don't need to be up here all the time, right? I don't need to be up here all the time. I just need to be here. I want a little bit more than my fair share. I don't have to have it all. I don't have to have it all. It's not like in that book, The Secret, or the video, right? I don't need to make a vision wall with all the shit I want, right? And go, I'm going to get that, I'm going to get that, I'm going to get that, I'm going to get that. Just do the right thing for the right reasons. Show up, suit up, ask questions, and go a little extra. Yeah, I'll take that extra shift. That's all it takes. I'm not going to give you the whole millennial rap about what people are saying about millennials and Gen X and Gen Y, that maybe there's a perception of lazy, you don't want to put in your time, and anybody not heard that? Okay, good. So you're all hearing what they're saying, right? You're all hearing what they're saying. Am I clear?
Yes.
Yes.
Right? So you know what your job is? Is to disrupt that thinking. Right? It's to disrupt that thinking. Right? Because that's not the case. I've been working with you guys for 5 years. You're awesome. You have the strongest sense of community I have seen in generations. Your sense of right and wrong is solid. You're not afraid of work. And I don't sense that you will be. So your job is to disrupt that thinking. And the only way to do that is just by doing it. You can't talk about it. You can't write a paper about it. There's no degrees for it. It's just by doing it. So, do we do questions now?
You got,
7 minutes?
well, according to that clock, you got 5.
Questions? Yes.
Okay, I know you said you was the the director of field of sales at the Hampton Inn Suites
Mm-hmm.
in March of '94. You said you open how many Hampton Inns?
About 400. 400. Give or take 10, 20. They'll kind of blend into one another. I spent a lot of times in airplanes and airports, and so business travel has that look of glamorous. And it is kind of cool. You know, there are times when, you know, I'm excited, I'm going somewhere, I'm doing everything. And before 9/11, let me tell you, it was a gas, right? No TSA, no nothing, you know, boom. I used to play a game. How late can I get to the airport and still catch my flight? How close could I cut it? It all changed. Anything else?
Anything else for Frank? Any career questions? Okay. Well, you know where he is, you know where I am.
So, for those of you who are going to deal with people who travel, whether you're in a restaurant or a hotel, let me give you a diagram of what their day is like, right? So, I'm a traveler, right? I leave my house, I get in my car, I take an Uber to the airport, whichever way. I park it, maybe in a remote lot. I gotta wait for a shuttle, or I gotta walk with my suitcase to the airport, into there. I gotta deal with TSA, right? They're awesome. They're awesome. I've had both my hips replaced, right? So I get to go through the special thing, right? So, but not every traveler does. That's great. You know, you basically take off all your clothes, your belt, all that stuff. This is all my stuff. Then I go down to the airline gate, right? And the airlines are known for their legendary service, right? That's what that's what their business model is built on, is great service. And I paid a lot for my ticket, all for the privilege of sitting ass cheek to ass cheek with some stranger, and then settling the armrest dominance score, right? And then in this little plane that is probably just a petri dish for some sort of airborne virus that I'm going to catch. Then I get off the plane, and then I get to my rental car or Uber, either way, into a town that I really don't know where I'm going. And by the way, I feel dirty, right? Even though I've showered that morning, I feel dirty. It's like all over me, like everybody's all over me, right? And I'm not even a germaphobe. And I get to the hotel. I get to my hotel. Where are my people who work in hotels or have worked in hotels? So I get to my hotel, I'm walking up to the front desk. And I look at them and they look at me. And you know what they say to me 90% of the time? They say, "You checking in?" What do you think I'm doing? I'm here to show you the latest in Samsonite luggage. Of course I'm checking in. If you want to see, you watch it down there. Watch it downstairs. I guarantee you, 1 out of 3 people walking up there with their suitcase, they'll ask me, "Checking in?" Right? You people in this business have such an opportunity to change somebody's day. That's their chance to take their first cleansing deep breath of the day. And we either hit it out of the park or we make an error. Right? So don't be somebody's error today. It doesn't matter what you do. Don't make an error. All right? I'm done with these guys.
Let's hear it for Frank.